I said, Maggie, I've got a question. I'm always nervous about what the sitter thinks of my picture when I show it to them after I've done it. What can I do about this? And she said, my advice to you, young man, and this was only a couple of years ago, uh, do not take any notice at all of what the subject thinks, otherwise you will be inhibited.
You were born to a family of artists, or at least your father was an artist, natural
That's right,
history
everybody, mum,
illustrator. What did your mom
grandma.
do?
Sorry?
What did your mom do with art?
My mum was a painter and then a designer. My grandma was an illustrator, and my granddad was a graphic designer, and my dad was a natural history illustrator. So everybody, really.
Mhm. It's beautiful. And then I saw, although I didn't look him up, that Wilfrid Wood, there is a former Wilfrid Wood who was a British artist. Is that right?
Apparently, I've no idea who he is or was, but yes, apparently. But I think he spells my name. He spelt his name differently. In other words, Wilfred, and I spell my name Wilfrid.
Got it. Do you think that your parents named you after him, or?
No, my dad named me after his father, who was also called Wilfrid.
Got it. Okay. So I wanted to kind of start with, in your 2019 TED Talk, which I really enjoyed, you had several beautiful quotes in there, and one of them was from David Hockney saying, "Faces are the most interesting thing we see. Other people fascinate me, and the most interesting aspect of other people, the point where we go inside them, is the face. It tells all." You used that
Yeah.
quote of David Hockney in your 2019 TED Talk. And I just wanted to jump right into that because you use several different mediums, a lot of plasticine, a lot of sculpture and clay, and also a lot of drawing now. But your subject is always the face.
Yes, I'm trying to move away from that a bit at the moment, but yes, it very often it is. You're right.
You have another quote that you use in that TED Talk. Um, and a lot of the content that's been made about you or in interviews with you has been about the kind of mild caricature that you do and just being able to really engage with the goofy aspects of people's faces. Um, and you talk about how prettified drawings are bad. And one of the things you said is the worst thing you can do as a portraitist is try to flatter. Tell me
Yes.
about why that's a mistake.
Well, for a start, it's really difficult to flatter. I'm not sure I could do it if I tried. Um, I think it just comes across as kind of rather simperingly weak for the if you look at a work of art, to think that the artist has rather pathetically tried to flatter the person. But it's a very tricky line. I don't want to upset people, and I don't want to insult people. But I mean, it's usually the things about people that they don't particularly like thin lips or sticking out ears or red eyes, or I don't know what it is. All those sorts of things that make them distinctive and are fun things to put in a picture of them. So I mean, there's a English artist called Maggie Hambling, and I really like her. And I went to a talk of hers, and at the end of the talk, she's very intimidating. You think I'm intimidating? She's genuinely intimidating, and I said, Maggie, I've got a question. I'm always nervous about what the sitter thinks of my picture when I show it to them after I've done it. What can I do about this? And she said, my advice to you, young man, and this was only a couple of years ago, uh, do not take any notice at all of what the subject thinks, otherwise you will be inhibited. And I
Hmm.
mean, basically, that's true. I think as an art, all artists say this, and very, very few artists actually do it. But you've just got to do your thing and not be too swayed by the public, how much you're going to sell it for, or what the subject thinks of it. I mean, there are loads of things that are pushing you to do a certain thing, but if you're to be any tiny bit of an interesting artist, you've got to do your own thing.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think if someone heard you say that you're concerned, as I've heard in a few interviews, that you're concerned with what the subject thinks, it does not come through with your work because you have that sincerity. Another quote that you mentioned in your TED Talk was from Sir Francis Bacon, the first Francis Bacon that we know of.
Yeah.
There is no excellent beauty that hath not some strangeness in the proportion.
Yes. That's a lovely quote. I don't quite know the context of it really. But I mean, I like to think that I and you know, a good portrait artist can in a way celebrate some of the things that I was mentioning that people might not love about their faces.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I can enhance their enormous nose to the point at which they're either amused by it or slightly fond of it, I might be doing them a little bit of a service, or even sort of pricking a boil of discomfort that they may have about. So I think some people, especially, well, I think maybe it goes more toward to drawing or painting people nude. I've lots of people who volunteer for me to be painted or drawn nude have maybe got quite bad body images, or have done, like they were very fat kids or something like that.
Sure.
And I think it's a sort of challenge to be seen as they are. And an artist is maybe more than a photographer. Somebody who draws or paints has got a certain sort of sensitivity, perhaps, whilst hopefully a certain honesty as well. And maybe that can be quite a therapeutic experience.
Right, because then you're getting them to a place where they need to look harder at their insecurities, possibly.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe if they're sometimes people are quite. I think when they're confronted by a portrait that I've done, some people are quite unnerved. But I generally hear that people like them more over time. You know, so it may be that they sort of come round to it, or there's a little bit of acceptance in it. It's also I mean, the very simple thing with me is most young pretty people like their portraits. Most middle-aged or old people don't. As simple as that. I mean, it's very boring and obvious generally. I mean, of course you get exceptions to that, but not many people like that how they age. And I think there's something, it's a bit easier to ignore in a photograph, perhaps. But when someone sat down for 2 or 3 hours in front of you, you know, there's something quite intense about the experience itself, and you've kind of met the person and you've stared at each other. You know, it's a bit of a kind of mesmeric situation that goes on. So I think it can have quite an emotional impact, and I'm glad for that. In a sense, for me, in a sense, I want my work to have an emotional impact, not necessarily devastating. Who am I to as it were, tell the truth to someone? But I hope that it has some sort of resonance.
Right. Well, you can't be responsible for someone else's reaction to their portrait, or reaction to anything for that matter. And yet, you know, you're coming to it with a sincerity and authenticity that you bring to the seriousness of it as an art. And yet you also sort of have your handwriting in all of it. When I see your work, I could see, you know, 10 different sketches of someone, and I could point out which one is Wilfrid Wood, because of your style, because of your sort of handwriting, so to speak, which I love. I'm going to share my screen where I just have some of your art pulled up, and maybe seeing some of this. I just, for ease, went to your Instagram page. If you see any of these that you want to comment on, just let me know. So a lot of these that you do are people who come in who say, I'd like to have my portrait done. How many of these do you do a week in a normal week?
Probably about 3 or 4.
Okay.
So that was a commissioned portrait of her, commissioned, I think, by her mum or her friend or something. I can't remember. But she was extremely nice, very, very with me on the project, you know, and lovely to paint. And she was a New Zealander, I think, or Aussie. And so, I mean, this may be a ridiculous cliche. I assume she was quite tough. So I gave her, well, she had a bit of a moustache. I probably gave her more moustache than she had, but I didn't think she'd mind. So I don't know if that's fair.
It's perfect. It's perfect. And also,
she's pretty anyway. She's pretty.
Right.
So I always feel with pretty people, you can take extra liberties.
I love it.
They're blessed. So I mean, why not slightly nudge them off their pedestal?
Yeah, it's a perfect example. And then you've got Mark Zuckerberg turned backwards here, right?
I always,
Is that the back of his head?
Behind. Yes, I can't bear him looking out all the time. So yeah, I'm always
he sees enough. He sees enough.
He sure does. The all-seeing Zuckerberg.
It's great. I'm going to do something very embarrassing and share, or what should be embarrassing, but maybe it's not to me. Share a poem that I wrote that I think hits on some of these points. I wrote this a couple years ago, maybe, but I just shared it this morning so that I could have it to show you. Basic portrait. I think I have the confidence of an attractive man, and so I am. My profile disappoints, the lack of chin, but then again, it wouldn't otherwise be my face. A local university where I have an art show of about 20 paintings, some sculptures, and my death mask on a dummy asked me to give a lecture on portraiture. I have to Google honorarium and then even more happily oblige. And I talk to them about honesty, and I show them my lack of chin. So that would be, just my profile, my lack of the kind of receding chin.
That's very nice. Yes, and confidence and good looks or lack of good looks or how people are with their looks is always a very interesting. I mean, really, it's what I hope to do is convey something of the person via their looks, via a drawing of them. But that's obviously a very difficult and dodgy thing to try and do, and I might give a completely wrong impression. Those two there on the pink, he's a model, he's an actual model. So I mean, he's super good looking, and also it's fun to give him a very red nose. And she was lovely as well, but he's an actual proper model. So when you've got someone like that in front of you, it's the difficulty sometimes is doing them justice. Because I mean, he's got a terrific face and a sort of vividness about him. And I hope I've got it to some degree. I'm not sure I have really.
No, I think it's great. And I think to go back to this Sir Francis Bacon quote, there is no excellent beauty that hath not some strangeness in the proportion. I feel like that goes back to something you mentioned in one of your videos, almost the mind-body problem. You had another quote that I didn't write down about a guy who did not want his portrait done because he said, my face is not who I am, it's a husk. So if I have a portrait done, that's a husk of a husk.
Yes.
So it's kind of like that philosophical problem of who is a person. Well, one of the best ways to kind of think that we can figure that out is through their face, through their eyes, through their micro expressions, their facial expressions. And yet, even if you get the face perfect, it's not who the person is. And so in trying to get at the sincerity of the portrait, of the image, we express that there's strangeness in the proportion. Maybe that's almost like a philosophical, the soul is not there, whatever the soul, the spirit, whatever it is, it cannot be captured.
Well, a portrait is a very, very limited thing, especially the sort, drawing from life. It's one aspect of someone on a certain day, in a certain light, at a certain angle, filtered by me. I mean, it's all potentially sort of miles away from the person, what the person's actually like. But the struggle and the hope is that you can make a connection with who they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do one like that one of Biden. That's from photos.
Mm-hmm.
So I do more satirical type of drawings,
mm-hmm.
as well as drawing. I mean, they're a kind of a bit of a jokey side shoot. What I'm much more interested in drawing just ordinary people, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And there's landscapes there. I'm trying to do landscapes at the moment in watercolor.
It's beautiful. I love to see, even in that, your handwriting come through, your style come through.
Oh, good. Well, it's nice to hear.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I always think artists are their own worst judge in that sort of way. I show, because I'm trying to use oil paint at the moment. I showed a friend of mine some of my oil paintings, and I said, "Oh, they're kind of a bit all over the place. I don't really know what I'm doing with them." And he took one look at a group of them and just said, "Oh, they just look like typical Wilfrid Woods."
Nice.
And that, on the one hand, you think, "Oh God, I can't seem to escape myself at all, or do anything different, or change anything around." On the other hand, you think, "Oh well, I suppose it's quite good to have a distinctive sort of look to what you do."
Mm-hmm.
It works both ways.
People want, fans of Wilfrid Wood, we want more Wilfrid Wood. So we love it. You have another quote in one of your videos saying, what was it? Basically,
I like quotes, don't I?
You do. Well, I like your quotes.
I love quotes.
It was something about, if I can find it, temptation to overwork a drawing, that it's easy to go too far with a drawing and ruin it.
Yeah.
So this is a great example of a real simple one, oil pastel or crayon, whatever that is.
Yes. It's always, I mean, when you've got someone sitting in front of you, I always feel there's a tipping point, because you don't want to waste their time. Mm-hmm. And you're getting a bit bored, and the after 2 or 3 hours, that's enough. And they've been sitting, they may have got pins and needles or whatever. There always seems to come a point where suddenly I do something that makes it worse.
Mm.
Then I immediately know I'm in the fiddling with it unnecessarily stage. So, I mean, that's just the point at which you have to immediately rein back and stop and just think, I'm unnecessarily poking around in something, and that's as good as it's gonna ever get, for better or worse. So
yeah,
you've got to stop quickly.
I love that. You make a mark, and then I don't like that. That's too far.
Yes,
nearly overcooked.
I heard this interview with a primary school teacher on the radio, and her kids kept winning like Young Artist of the Year or something awards. And the interviewer said, "Why do your kids keep winning this award?" And she said, "Because I take their work away from them before they've finished it."
Mm.
And I thought that was a brilliant thing as well.
So you grew up drawing a lot because your parents were always drawing.
Yeah.
Of course, your dad, natural history illustrator.
Yeah.
And then, do you remember when you first worked with plasticine?
Yes, I do really. It was because I used to do kind of model making jobs for magazines and stuff like that. And I got this job for Cosmopolitan magazine. I don't know if it still exists. It was a kind of so-called women's magazine with recipes, things about weddings, and I had to do the Cosmopolitan Kama Sutra,
Oh,
which
wow.
was 12 different sexual positions, and they wanted me to make these little figures at it,
Uh-huh.
and I just didn't have time to use any other material, so I suggested them, how about plasticine? Or I think somebody else said to me, "Why don't you do it in plasticine? And then it would be quick." And I did that, and I just found it was a really nice material to work with.
What an amazing foray into plasticine, Kama Sutra figures.
Well, it's sometimes, a job, because I'm not the purest of artists. I've done lots of commercial jobs, and occasionally somebody will commission me to do something.
Mhm.
But quite often that can be very good in shifting you right over to another area, or forcing you to do something you never otherwise would have done, because
Mhm.
it's terribly easy as a completely self-motivated artist to repeat yourself, basically.
Right. Paul McCartney, is that the subject you've done the most?
Yes, I'm
Drawing
sure
and
it is.
yeah.
That's quite a long time ago, because he's got dyed hair. He doesn't dye his hair in that ridiculous way anymore.
I love it. It's funny. I think for me, Buddy Holly is the subject that I've done the most. So also a rock star.
Well, and one of Paul McCartney's heroes.
Everybody's hero, I think. I love Buddy Holly. I love this self-portrait.
That's plasticine, yeah.
And so you have something unique in working with plasticine that let me stop sharing my screen here. That I mean, I find myself as an artist, and I would think a lot of other artists, you work with this material that's by nature impermanent,
Yeah.
which is really interesting because I think most artists are obsessed with permanence and the idea of, for better or worse, wanting to create something that will live past them, Um, I don't know. Do you think of the art as just like the thing that you make, or the photograph that stays afterward, or just the process and then it's smashed and created into something else?
Um, my dad was a hoarder. So he had a house stuffed full of stuff. And I've got a kind of off-on relationship with stuff. I go kind of mad with it. I obviously, I'm a typical collector type of person, but I don't really want to be that person.
Hmm.
Oh, I've just got the doggy collector come.
Okay.
Mind if I pause for a minute,
Yeah, not at all. Go ahead.
and we can start that bit again if you like.
Yeah,
I'll,
either
I'll
way.
just be a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine. Hey, sorry.
No, it's great. I think maybe I should start including intermissions in my interviews because it gives me time to think about where we're going. So maybe it's good. Okay, so yeah, you were saying
Do you want
the
to start your thing
impermanence.
again? Whatever you led me into, I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah. So you're unique as an artist in the sense that one of the mediums that you use most, plasticine, is by nature an impermanent medium.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, how you think of that art and the impermanence of it.
An old art teacher of mine said a work of art is only a work of art once it's sold. Up until that point, it's a storage problem, which is a horrible thing to say.
Yeah.
But there's an awful grain of truth in it, especially if it's sculptures. So that's partly why I do so much more stuff on paper now, because even plasticine, which I then recycle, takes up a great big load of space, and so flat work is much easier to keep.
Mm-hmm.
But plasticine is it's very nice and easy and quick to work with, but it just crumbles and turns to dust basically in over years, and it attracts hairs and dust, and so it just doesn't last. And I take photographs of it, but the fun is in the making of it and the instant reaction of people. It's not to keep yet another work of art to add to the world.
Mm-hmm. What do you think you would do if you weren't an artist? What do you think your occupation might be?
I always think I'd love to be a musician.
Mm-hmm.
I much prefer music to art, really.
Yeah.
And like I said, I want to move people or emotionally involve people in my work as much as I can, which is basically a tiny bit compared to music, because music is the most fantastically emotionally engaging medium.
Mm-hmm.
I cry with music left, right, and center, but I've never cried with a work of art. So, I mean, if I could start again, I'd be some sort of a musician.
Do you play any instruments at all?
Not really. I sing. I'm singing in a choir tonight.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's called Sacred Harp.
Sacred Harp?
Yeah, it's American.
Okay.
Just wondered if you'd heard of it.
I have not. Sacred Harp. Harp?
Harp as in
Yeah.
But it's not nobody plays the harp. It's just called that.
Voices.
It's basically it's British or English music that went church music that went over to America in 17 something. The Americans put it together, changed it around, sort of hiked it up a bit, as Americans tend to, and then it's all in this big book, and we sing from this big book. There are 500 hymns in this big book. And we sing the hymns. It's a cappella, 4-part a cappella. It's also called shape note singing. And it's kind of like the rural parts of eastern United States.
Okay.
I think particularly where it started. Anyway, it's great and I love it. So that's my musical, release.
That's amazing. I'll look that up. Sacred Heart.
Yeah, do have a look at you. You might. I've got a feeling you might slightly like it.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. What do you do with writer's block in terms of making art, or does that happen to you still?
Well, the good thing, I've got a friend who's a documentary maker, and he says he's jealous of me because all I need is a pencil and a bit of paper to get working. Whereas, to make documentaries, you don't need so much stuff anymore. You could probably almost do it with an iPhone. But making films, at least, is such an enormous operation. So if I get writer's block, I never get writer's block really, because I can always just sit down and draw something. I get frustrated that none of it's good enough all the time, but I don't get to I've never got actually stuck.
How many drawings you mentioned that you feel like none of it's good enough. How many drawings do you make that are behind every drawing that you end up posting to Instagram that you do like enough to post? How many unseen drawings or works of art do you think?
Probably about half.
Okay.
I probably don't show or chuck away as many as I show, or little bit more, not absolutely gallons of them, because sometimes you don't even know. Sometimes people like a drawing that you don't particularly like yourself, or that sort of thing happens. And quite often I'll show a whole load of drawings just of one draw, like a live drawing session. So then it's quite nice probably to see a bit of hit and miss in the drawing. So if I show 10 drawings, there's going to be 1 or 2 that are a little bit finished, and some scrappy ones, and some that are just kind of don't really add up to anything probably. But then they're all there. That's the session.
Yeah. When did you start using, and we'll kind of can wrap up with this, but when did you start using Instagram, and what is your, I mean, I think I've heard you mention in a video how you're thankful for Instagram because it's kind of a very democratic. You can see all kinds of art that you like and don't like, and find people, and you and I can meet, and I can ask you for an interview.
Exactly. So I didn't want to do Instagram at all. This is probably about 8 years ago or something, or maybe, probably about 8 years ago. I was already fed up with Facebook, and I didn't want to do this new thing. But I had an agent at the time, and they said, you must do this new thing called Instagram. Anyway, I just started it in a little way, and I happened to enjoy it. And then it just trundled along. And then during lockdown, I think like a lot of artists, basically I had a great time. I got lots of followers on Instagram and sold loads of drawings, and it was all terrific. And now it's a steady downhill slide of not really selling much work at all. And my Instagram numbers gradually go down. So it's good. It's important not to hold too much store by it, for sure, because I might get banned tomorrow for something, or they might say, oh, we're not doing Instagram anymore. Or they might suddenly say, oh, Instagram's just videos from now on. Whatever. You're under the whim of Mark Zuckerberg and his mates.
Right.
So it's a difficult thing. That when I left college, in order for people to see my work, I had to take bad photographs of my work, print them out with my slow printer, and send them to people. And then one person, if I'm lucky, would look at this thing that I'd laboriously print out and then chuck it in the bin. Whereas now you can reach thousands of people in one click, but so can everybody else. So there's just so much more of a deluge of images and artists and people wanting to do this and trying to be good at that. And, everybody in the world who's trying to, do the similar sort of thing to you. So, I mean, it's just enormous and difficult. So I think you have to just tread a very difficult line of, for me, it is what enables me to work and meet you and sell work and be commissioned to do things and then do workshops and God knows what. Almost everything goes through Instagram. I'm slightly embarrassed to say, but there we are. That's just how it is.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Wilfrid, for taking time to meet with me. This has been awesome and a great excuse for me to meet you and pick your brain.
And for you to read your poetry.
And for me to read my poetry, embarrassingly, yeah.
No, I liked it very much.
Thank you so much. And if I ever make it out to London to visit my sister,
please do, yeah.
I'm going to make it to you as well. And it was great to hang out.
Thanks a lot. That was very fun.